We started this series back in March, and the intention here was to create a space for designers to come together, the community to come together, and have a conversation about the role of design in shaping the future. And we really wanted to bring in new mindsets and tools and ways that people can start to help themselves make decisions about actually influencing and creating a future we all want to be a part of as we are taking on these new technologies and entering into these uncharted territories. And we know that's really a big challenge. So that's been our goal here, and we've had a lot of great talks, and I'm very excited for this month's talk. We have Pamela Pavlicek here. She is the founder of Change Sciences, which is a future insights firm that works with organizations to help them envision a human future for technology. So very, very relevant to this topic. She's also working on a book right now called Designing for Happiness, which I'm very interested to read when it comes out. And I learned earlier today that she is in the process of applying her background in Russian literature to make chatbots more engaging and interesting. So very, very interested in that. So with that, I would like to introduce Pamela, and thank you all for joining us for Design is Emotion.
Thanks, everyone. So excited to be here. So we are going to learn all about really getting in touch with our feelings tonight. But the first thing I want you to do is just kind of imagine the future. I know this is kind of a risk now that you have glasses of wine and it's the end of a workday, but just close your eyes for a minute and just think, like, picture the future in your head. Okay, now you can open them again. Does it look kind of like this? Some people are saying no. That's good. Especially the dog. I mean, that's kind of sad, right? But there's something about this that, I know, well, it would be neat and tidy, wouldn't it? That when we envision the future, it always seems like it's kind of clean and efficient and tidy. Sometimes we think of ourselves in front of that mirror, you know, like we always see that smart mirror everywhere that has the weather, as if we don't have windows and we can't look outside and see the weather or whatever. But that's what we imagine. Because we're trying to picture ourselves in the future. It's kind of like we're at the Lacanian mirror phase of technology right now, where we recognize ourselves in the future. And this is great. I mean, we've got this vision, and it's pretty rational. It's pretty much that technology fades into the background, helps us be productive, it's convenient, it's efficient. But there's one problem with this. We're not completely rational, right? Like, we see something like this. Why? Why are they doing this? This is so mean, you know? Like, seriously. And I don't know if you guys have heard the story about HitchBot, but HitchBot was a friendly robot that couldn't do very much, relied on the kindness of strangers to get all over Europe, all over Canada, where of course they were very kind to HitchBot, and then made it to America, first stop Philadelphia, and well, you can imagine what happened to poor HitchBot. And people were sending, you know, messages on Twitter. Oh, I'm so sorry we did this to you, HitchBot. You know, it's so awful, and we feel for you. And we do. We have like this emotional bond with technology, even if it's not really technology. Like this little girl. It's a water heater. Wait for it. ourselves, we anthropomorphize anything with a face, with irregular movement, like a Roomba, say, with voice, with gestures, even things that are kind of like us. We're more apt to anthropomorphize our dogs and cats, say, rather than, I don't know, like worms or things like that. Although, I don't know, I could go there with a worm. And if something has a backstory. So there's been a lot of academic research in this area where they have, researchers have created a story about a robot who was attacked by a surgeon with a knife who was trying to take it apart. And people felt empathy for the robot in question. Now, with human backstories, sometimes that tends to dehumanize them. The same researchers told people a story about a woman who had been harassed at work, and all of a sudden she was given less agency by the people in the study. So we're still kind of figuring out these weird emotions that we have, but we're very apt to anthropomorphize anything. And, it develops into maybe even inappropriate feelings. So JWT intelligence, we laugh about this, but JWT Intelligence just came out with a study, they're like a trend research group, about how people who had never had Alexa before, and then they gave them an Alexa and they spent 30 days with the Alexa, 1/3 of these people confessed to having sexual fantasies about Alexa. So, I mean, we really have a kind of interesting relationship with technology. And it's not just that we anthropomorphize technology and that we assign it a personality. It's become an extension of ourselves. So Eric Pickersgill, you probably saw this photography exhibit from a while back. It's called Removed. So he took pictures of people and removed their cell phones from their hands. And that's why these guys look a little bit lost, because they lost part of their body. And we channel our emotions through technology. So, I mean, obviously anger is probably the top internet emotion. It's had a long history, from flame wars to hashtags to trolls to, now sad is the new mad. And we and we have all kinds of feelings about the internet and our experiences with technology. Like right now, if I asked you to just think about, I'm going to give you the name of an app, and then you just shout out like what emotions you associate with it. So let's start. I could start with Tinder, but I'm not going to. How about Instagram? Fun. Fake. It's not really an emotion, but I get what you're getting at. Distracting. How about shame? You know what I mean? Like when you go like deep back into somebody's profile, you shouldn't be there, and then you accidentally you like something. Oh, terrifying. And we don't even have names for these emotions. So John Koenig has this project called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, where he names these emotions. Most of them don't have to do with the internet, but we know this one, right? This experience, like we are taking a picture, but everyone else has already taken it, and what's kind of the point of that? And then there are other emotions that we maybe are familiar with, like cyberchondria. I think we've all had attacks of this, where it's like, please, oh my God, I have leprosy. It's obvious. And then there's ones that we don't really have words for. So as Kai pointed out, I used to be a Russian lit major way back in the day, and I have many friends who are Eastern European. I spent a lot of time in Prague when that was the cool thing, and my Czech friends have always been like, Bam, you will never understand our emotion of litost. It is this emotion you have when you recognize yourself and you feel a shame and sadness. But I get this when I look at my Spotify Discover Weekly every week. And I'm like, that's not me. So it's profielitost, right? It's our new word. So now, up until this point, we have all these feelings. We haven't had that many ways to express them. We started with like. Now we have some other emotions. I wish that Facebook would have the thankful emotion all the time. That's what the purple flower is. But they bring it out just for Mother's Day, I guess, because we're only thankful for our moms. Who cares about everything else? I don't know. But anyway, we don't have that many ways to express our emotion. And, we need like flow charts like this to sort it out and figure out like, oh, how are we going to get through this? It's complicated, right? We don't know. So we have this kind of tension where we're having all these feelings, but somehow we're not able to really connect with technology in the way that we want to. Now, you may say to yourself, well, okay, but we already do design for emotion. Haven't you heard of that, Pamela? Like there's, Apple, they have been doing this for years, even down to when you put in your passcode incorrectly. If you're still using a passcode on your phone, it'll kind of shake its head, like embedding these kind of human gestures into the interface itself. And of course, we have delight. We have delightful details that we like to share. And most of our delightful details are sort of these fun little extras, these Easter eggs that we hide. And sometimes they can have a bigger purpose. They can be personal. They can show that we care. But it can also go very wrong. One person's happy is another person's infantilizing, or I don't know like who might be happy by that error message with the monster, but I think it's supposed to be cute. And it's become almost, dare I say, cliche at this point. If we look at what we consider delightful details or designing for emotion, it kind of has the same characteristic to it. It's cute, it's animated, maybe a little snarky. I mean, there are some benefits to this because if you want a brand mascot, unlike a human that might do things that embarrass you in the future or in the past, brand mascots won't do that, right? So like if you had a cute brand mascot for, say, Jell-O pudding, you wouldn't have to worry about that situation. But when we think about bringing this over to voice, it gets a little weird, right? Like, do we want to have cute little ironic interactions all the time? Maybe. But who are we really talking to? It's kind of a puree of thousands of people, or is it a big global corporation, or is it a tube? Like, it gets kind of complicated, and it stretches the limits of how we're designing for emotion. So, and the other problem with delight, of course, is a problem that we've known about for a while. It's called hedonic adaptation. What once delighted us will become tiresome after a while. So right now, like when I first put this up, you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of cute. If we were here 3 hours from now, still looking at this, you would be going crazy. So, and we know that happiness is really complicated. It's a lot of different emotions. It's not just delight. I don't even know if delight is actually an emotion, to be quite honest. And a lot of things that are associated with happiness aren't really what we might normally consider emotions. So, okay, design for emotion, we have a way of doing it, but we're kind of bumping up against the limits of it right now. We have this other thing that we call behavioral design that actually is design for emotion, because you've seen this model before, I'm sure, many times, but it starts with an emotional trigger. It usually starts with something negative, a negative feeling, whether it's lonely or just bored or anxious, and then you kind of get into the loop where you're getting the variable reward and you're making an investment, but it relies on you to have this negative emotion over and over again. If you look at, say, rehab clinics, they also have similar diagrams describing what addiction is like to drugs. And this pains me a little bit that we've gone in this direction with design, even though, and we don't really think of it as emotional design, but it is. And so we've put ourselves in this weird position that we feel like we're addicted, and we design products for our phone to get ourselves off our phone. So this is Ringly, and you can wear this giant ring, and it gives you notifications, but of course you have to pick up your phone to look at what the messages really are and to fiddle with it. Okay, so we have designing for maybe one emotion, delight, designing for negative emotions and temporarily soothing those. What's coming next? Well, I think what's coming next is a huge change. I'll call it emotion 2.0, but we're getting this kind of, I don't know, confluence of machine learning and affective computing, which is simply put going to be able to get some kind of read on our emotions. So it's already embedded in the latest Apple OS. Apple bought a few different emotion sensing AI platforms like Emotiant that does facial coding. And it kind of falls along this line. So you have emotion sensing that can recognize emotion to a certain degree first from signals that are physical. So say your facial expression, or something that you're wearing that tracks your heart rate or your skin temperature or things like that. And it recognizes kind of those signals, and then it interprets those and puts them usually into these 5 buckets. This is a model of emotion that goes back to about the 70s, and there's a lot of different models of emotion, but this is how emotion AI works right now anyway. And you guys may recognize this from, from this movie, if you saw this fun movie and you've got these 5 emotions. It was also based on Inside Out was based on the same principle. So it recognizes from physical signals, it interprets them into these emotion categories. It can then adapt behavior or adapt the interface itself, and probably not a good idea. Or it could even simulate emotion in response to picking up those signals. So okay, this sounds pretty good. Like, okay, maybe we're going to get a little bit more to this. Let's look at each of these in a little more detail. So first, there's kind of old school natural language, but that's getting better, right? So we have something like the hedonometer, which is just positive, negative signals, taking the text from tweets and then giving you a sense of, positive, negative, and that's pretty much it. This is from the Computational Story Lab at University of Vermont, and they do a lot of this kind of research. The next level up is IBM Watson, which is taking words and categorizing them into these 5 or sometimes 7 emotion categories. And that's being already used in some instances, well, we all know about Tay and how that went. But this is Microsoft's other project that is actually pretty successful. This is Xiaoice, super popular in China, and does recognize emotion from text so that the chat can respond with a little more empathy, a little more sensitivity, and go beyond just being kind of clever and cute. It's still pretty rudimentary, really, but it's kind of getting there. There's vocal intonation. That's another big way. There aren't as many players in that area, but there's beyond verbal. So I guess you can just guess who's talking here. I'll leave that to you. But they put out videos where that you can see that kind of trace the emotion in people's voice. Again, pretty rudimentary, and a lot of this the customer service agent may be able to do without this technology, but that's just where it's being used at this point. There's facial expression. This is getting probably the most attention right now. So we know that you can detect faces from our Snapchat filters and Google Photos and all kinds of other places, but it takes it one step further and characterizes those facial expressions according to these different emotions. So that's pretty good, right? And it's being used a lot right now, mostly in advertising and entertainment. So it can detect emotion while you're watching a video, say, from your facial expressions. You have to be pretty animated, though. Like if you're looking just at your phone, kind of stone-faced, flipping through stuff, it doesn't work quite as well yet. And of course, it has to be trained on lots and lots of data to even get to these basic emotion categories. Finally, there's physical signals. So we love, because we can't understand babies at all, really, we love to hook them up to various technologies. And this one, used to be Sproutling, got bought by Mattel, detects cry and heart rate. So it can detect how serious the cries really are. So could be good for new parents when you're trying to discern, like, will the baby go back to sleep so I can lay in bed for a few more minutes? Or is it like gonna just get into the zone where I have to get up? So could be useful. It's also being used for people who are suffering from PTSD or on the autism spectrum. So mood wings is a good example, this kind of whimsical of a way that detects emotion and interprets it for the people around you, so that you could tell, for instance, if you were living with somebody with PTSD, you could see if there were detect triggers or get a sense of their emotions going forward. Some of these are experimental. So there's another one that this is more kind of quasi-art project, but the app really exists, called People Keeper, based on a wristband. I'll just let you experience this one for yourself.
We only have so much emotional bandwidth.
Bring it in.
And limited time.
Mustafa?
Our social circles are widening.
We don't know. That's bad.
All those relationships
Anything in general that makes you excited.
can be overwhelming. Now there's an app. People Keeper tracks your physical and emotional response while you're hanging out. And it analyzes the data to identify who stresses you out, makes you excited, sad, or happy. See how your relationships stack up. And let People Keeper find the ones that work for you. It'll automatically manage your relationships, so you don't have to. Scheduling time with people that make you feel good. And blocking the ones that don't. Forget fake friends, failed romance, and FOMO. Optimize your social life with People Keeper.
Okay, well, that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but that is a possible direction that it could go in, right? And the dream is to put all of these together, right? So you have various physical signals coming in that are being translated into emotion. So Pepper, the robot that you've seen around a lot, probably is being used in customer service contacts all over the place, can detect a couple of different emotional signals and is actually being trained in high schools, going to high school in Japan. And because if you want to learn about emotions, like hang out with teenagers, obviously. And then, maybe Pepper can teach the little Now robots, also made by SoftBank. And they have dance parties. And then they take care of our elderly. So it's a natural progression, you see. A lot of these are developed for just this kind of situation. And so, of course, entwined with all of this new technology that's going to help us understand emotions a little bit better are some ethical issues. Of course, there's fun context. The game Nevermind uses a bunch of different signals, your face, and I think a wristband to give you different perspective in a game, right? So if you're feeling calm, you get one view of a game. If you're getting anxious, another. Also used in therapy.
I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you. I'll ask a few questions to get us started. And please feel free to tell me anything. Your answers are totally confidential. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
We look kind of
So,
creepy, don't we?
How are you doing today?
We humans.
I'm doing well.
That's good. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh, I'm from LA myself.
Okay, so we laugh a little bit because it's kind of weird. However, for some people that are afraid of being judged or that don't feel like they have time for therapy or might not seek it out, it does potentially have a place, maybe working in tandem with therapists. So, okay, this is good. Most of this is kind of theoretical. How does this all really work? So you're lucky. I tried a lot of this stuff out for you guys, so you don't have to suffer. So here's where you learn a lot about me that you probably don't even want to know. So here's Moody's, which is an app by Beyond Verbal, and you can try it too. And I tried it in a few different contexts. So you can see off to the side there, one was reading a story with my daughter, one was on a client call. Can you guess what I was doing in this one, where I was feeling self-control in my voice? No, I wasn't yelling at my kids. I was talking to Alexa. So maybe we talk a little bit like a robot when we're talking to a robot. I don't know. I tried Affectiva. My youngest daughter decided to help me out with this one, so it did pretty well in the smile. The middle one, I don't know if I would really say that's disgust. It's like super happy, and then it totally didn't know what to do with duck lips. Now, it does seem to work pretty well on cats. The last one I tried is this little device called Think, which I noticed lately they haven't been marketing to put it on your head, but I put it on my head, and it can make you calm, or it can make you energized. So I picked calm, and I put it on my head, and it looked really cool. I looked kind of like this cool person right here with the plastic potato chip on my head. And, and after a few minutes, it got really uncomfortable, and I took it off. And then I kind of had like a really concentrated headache in that part of my head. And then I had an attack of cyberchondria, and I started like Googling around like, oh no, is this FDA approved? Or I don't think it is. And now I don't think they're advertising you to put it on your head anymore. So I don't know, like, am I gonna be okay or not? I'm not really sure. But anyway, this is another way a lot of this could go, is like, forget about it. We don't need to like mess with people's emotions in design. We can just have everyone wear like happy devices, and then who cares? It could all look like, you know, Craigslist or whatever. We don't mind. So, you know, there's a lot of limits to emotion AI. It doesn't quite work perfectly yet, but I think the bigger one is that it's not quite getting us to emotional intelligence. So this is another area of emotion where there's a few different models. The one I really like is the one that comes out of the Yale School for Emotional Intelligence, called the ruler model. So recognize emotions, understand emotions, be able to label them or name them. That's really important, it turns out. Express them, and then regulate your emotions. So it's not quite getting us to that. There's a lot of different theories about emotion. So there's a lot of gradations of emotion. There's levels of intensity. There's all different kinds of emotion. The classical theory of emotion says that emotion starts in our bodies, and we all then immediately know what that emotion is instinctively, and we have a universal expression on our face or in our voice. That's been going on for a long time, since William James. That theory has been around. And right now, neuroscience is kind of disproving that theory, along with the beloved triune brain theory as well, like the whole lizard brain or system 1, system 2. It turns out our brains are not so simplistic as that, and it's not so neat and tidy, and emotion and cognition are mixed up together. And so part of emotional intelligence is going to be registering lots of different intensities, lots of different kinds of emotions. Behaviors and emotions don't neatly map to each other. There are all kinds of inputs to an emotion. There are all kinds of outputs of behavior, and they don't always make sense. They're not always predictable. They're not easy to spot. There are a lot of different layers of emotion. There's social layers, There are contextual layers in our environment. So really, I mean, what I came out of this is emotions are really super complicated. And I think that when we think about emotional artificial intelligence, that we just have to be aware of this, that we're making a lot of assumptions about what is the right theory about emotion and what are the right emotions to detect and how universal expressions are and who is going to get to say what those emotions are, that we should be cautious about it. This is not to say that we shouldn't use it. We're going to anyway, because like we always do, we're going to do everything. So I have some thoughts about maybe where we can start with this, because we are going to start to encounter this more and more. And so I'm going to talk about just a few ways that I think we can broaden our perspective on emotional design. So let's first look at emotional range. So you guys, this is my dystopian examples here. So you guys probably recognize this from Westworld. I don't know if this is really a good idea, but it's a cool picture. It's a complicated model, isn't it? So we want to have more granularity in emotion. That's what's becoming a really important part of emotional intelligence as the latest research is trying to understand this better. And it has to be ambiguous. So this is an analysis of a photo after a terrorist attack in France, the one where the car plowed into the people. And this man, one of his friends, was killed in the attack, and he's being interviewed. So we can see that he's probably not really happy. He's feeling mixed emotions, and the expression is ambiguous. And how we feel and interpret those emotions inside is ambiguous and conflicted. And we need to leave room for that and be okay with that and compensate for that, because emotion AI will direct us to one answer, and our design practices so far will direct us to one answer with emotion. So I think we need to keep that in mind. We need to branch out to the emotions that we're recognizing, right? So I never knew this was a thing. I've always had this where like, little babies or little cute dogs, and you just want to pinch them. Like, why do you want to pinch them? It seems wrong, but there's an emotion for that. And I think we're going to need to, as we build out our practice, we're going to need to be able to recognize more emotions and build our emotional vocabularies and let people build their own vocabularies. And maybe our models should be multi-layered so that when we're looking to design for emotion, we're going to have these emotion AI inputs at a perceptual level, at a contextual level, at a social level. But we'll also, and here's the kicker, ask people. I know, like in design, we don't like to ask people stuff because we're like, oh wait, they're not going to be able to say. But we're not going to ask them like how to design something, right? We're going to ask them how they feel, how they interpret it, what they take away from the experience. That's a lot different. And so I think we need to get comfortable with that and give people tools to adjust that. So this is another kind of conceptual project based on, I don't know if you guys remember when Facebook came out with their experiment where they kind of manipulated positive and negative posts to see what effect it would have on people's emotional responses. Well, this artist took the API from that, which was available, or something similar to that, and made this mood manipulator. And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, right? But it's a slider where you could actually test out, well, what if my feed was more positive? What if I saw the negative posts more often? What if I saw, this is using more of an ocean personality model. I don't know if this exactly is the right thing, but giving people some tools to understand how emotion is being detected and interpreted, and then their experience is being adapted, is going to have to be built in. And that's going to be a huge design challenge for all of us when we're designing for emotion. But I think it's something that we need to do from a perspective of fulfillment and emotional intelligence, but also from the perspective of just ethics. Next thing, I would emphasize emotion as context rather than destination. So we all know those pyramids. I'm not going to show you Maslow's hierarchy, because it's a hierarchy of needs, not emotions. Let's argue about that later. Or useful, usable, delightful. I don't think we want to get people to an emotion always necessarily. Maybe sometimes we do. But it's going to get crazy if we try to do that. And I mean, it's going to get weirder too, right, if we take that approach. So, I mean, maybe sometimes it'll be appropriate, but I don't know. So I think we want to think about emotion as not just a place that we want to take people to, but as something in the background that we can know to and have more empathy and build that into our experiences, because there are going to be situations where we do need that, like the adorable Paro the seal, who is another kind of emotional prosthetic in a way that's being used, and to good effect. Okay, third one, humanize humans first. So we talk a lot about humanizing technology. All the time we're humanizing technology, we're humanizing the bots. We naturally, as we saw, do that. We anthropomorphize everything. Just put a set of googly eyes on it and it will be like, we're going to anthropomorphize it. But we talk about this all the time, and we do this in form and also in voice too. So this is another experiment I ran where I decided to ask questions from the Proust questionnaire to various chatbots, and they had trouble with that. But anyway, we're trying to give them kind of human characteristics almost without understanding fully what those human characteristics are. At the same time, we're kind of botifying people in a way. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of our experiences that are guided by algorithms are kind of nudging us to be more like we were in the past. We've all had that experience where we're texting our mom and there's like something embarrassing that you texted, your boyfriend or girlfriend pops up instead in your predictive text, and you're like, oh, Snooky, or whatever the term of endearment is. I think we need to be careful about that balance. And so when we talk about humanizing technology, I think we want to talk about giving humans agency first. And a big way we do that is through emotional intelligence. It may be that we just need different models, right? When we think about humanizing, maybe we shouldn't be assigning a personality to everything. So this is based on kind of an adaptation of the work of Peter Paul Verbeek, who's a philosopher working in the Netherlands right now. But he points out we have these different relationships with technology. Sometimes we can be merged, right? Like a cochlear implant would be an example of that. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe the technology is invisible. It's sensors in the sidewalk or in our world, and we're not aware of it. Probably in those two instances, we don't need a personality for it. Maybe it's just as simple as thinking about, like, do we humanize it does it need to act as a machine when it detects emotion? Well, then maybe we don't need to humanize so much. Is it an extension of ourselves? How will we use emotion that way? Or does it really need to be given a personality and like a human? So thinking more kind of about these relationships and what exactly we mean when we say humanizing technology. Finally, I think respecting human emotion and not trivializing it is what came out as very important to me out of all this work, is even when it's well-intentioned, like Samaritan's Radar was an effort a couple years ago based on detecting emotion in tweets, hoping to and successfully sometimes finding people who are depressed and then encouraging their friends to intervene. We've seen a few more of those kinds of efforts in the news lately. This one failed because it didn't really work so well. And people were like, well, I'm not really depressed. I was just being, snarky or ironic or whatever. So I think, it's very easy to kind of trivialize these things or to think optimistically like, oh, we're going to help people, when it's really rather complicated. Even tests like this that were developed by, it's the Mind in the Eyes test developed by Simon Baron-Cohen, Ali G's dad, but also a very respectable psych researcher. And he developed this to detect kind of level of autism spectrum and how well people are able to detect emotion in people's eyes. Even this is kind of a slip up. Can anyone see how that might not be perfectly balanced or might be somewhat biased? Well, there's that for sure. Yeah, so no, there's definitely contextual things. I think the big critique that came out of it is that all the women's eyes were pretty heavily made up and marked as flirtatious or interested, and then it was a bunch of really older men looking thoughtful, and they're all white. So it's, and this is somebody who's very respected in the field who, we're living in our own bubbles, and it's really hard to get out of that. And so when I say respect human emotion, I mean like we need to be really careful and we need to be really inclusive when we do this. So I want to encourage us to imagine the future we want when we're designing for emotion. There's a lot to take in, but I think it's something that is going to be mostly a positive. I think definitely we'll want things like this that help us understand our own emotions. This is mood notes that help give us more recognition of our own emotions and emotional intelligence. I don't know, maybe we'll want fun, cool dresses like this that light up when we have certain emotions. I might like that. We definitely probably want it for our dogs, to see what they're feeling. Especially, I have Boston Terriers, they don't have tails, so it might be kind of handy for that. We might have to interpret robot emotions, like Cosmo here, or we might even be taking care of robots, like Needybot here.
If robots had puppies, it would look like Needybot.
This is a blend of art and science in a 2-foot package.
Needybot is a robot that we built that is intentionally not able to do a lot itself.
Needybot can't answer the phone.
It can't push the elevator buttons.
Can't walk up the stairs.
If Needy falls over, Needy needs to be picked up.
There's just so much it can't do.
We probably will have some robots like that where we just create them just so we can have a bond with them. But the fact is, this is coming, and designing for emotion is changing, and it's probably going to change our experience for the better, because when we think about human intelligence, it's not very intelligent without this emotional component. And so I really want to think about emotion in a kind of more complex, nuanced, and graduated way, because I think this is where we're going, from something that's just simply a point in time to kind of nurturing or developing a relationship over time. And so I think at this point, because I do this for every talk too, you guys know enough that we can do a little pledge. I want you to raise your right hands and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear to everyone in this room, to friendly robots everywhere, and to Pamela, that I will always respect human emotion in design. And with the power vested in me as speaker, I now declare you an amazing audience. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have a question?
At the beginning of your talk, you asked us what we see the future to be like.
Yeah.
And you showed that crazy picture of the transparent dog. But how do you, as a professional in this, how do you see the future? Is it something that is a concept up there?
Yeah, I think that if a positive view of the future, which I think we should have, because we spend a lot of time spinning out dystopian futures, and that has its uses, but somehow it still makes its way into our interface design. Like Minority Report, I guess, is sort of the classic example, but Black Mirror, too, is getting there. So I want to think about positive kind of goals for technology. And I think emotion is definitely in there because that's something that we are lacking in our relationship with technology. There is no empathy. It's kind of a one-sided relationship, and we as human beings compensate for the dumb machines and all their foibles, but it would make the experience better in certain cases if there was emotion sensing, and if it was sensitive to people and we have more control over it. So that's the future I want to see, is a future where we have human agency over emotion, but our technology has a better understanding of it.
I feel like many of us in this room are working for-profit companies. So, and the point is to make money. Probably the point is to do user-centered design and somehow manipulate the users and then make money. So how does this play, like the desire to make money, like the business side, and the user-centeredness?
I think emotion is a really interesting case there, because anyone who has worked in marketing already knows that emotion is something, emotion sells, emotion creates a long-term relationship, emotion can create a bond, and it's not just about manipulating emotion. I mean, sometimes it is. Definitely ads will try to do that. Lots of experiences will, but it's not always about that, right? I mean, I think all of us in this room might have a kind of emotional identification with a brand or with an experience that either it creates an emotion in us, or there's an emotion we associate with it that's positive. I can't think of any brand or app or online experience where I associate like just pure joy and ecstasy, but I definitely can think of somewhere I associate with care or trust or belonging or things like that. So I do think that it has commercial value, even if we're careful with it and we're not, going crazy with it. So.
Thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. If you take something like some of the digital assistants today, like Siri or Alexa, or the Google Assistant, and you were to sort of apply your lens of what it takes to put more emotion into it, how would you go about that? Like, would you say right away I would try to make it recognize more emotion to have that emotional connection? Would you say maybe it should take the approach of needy bot, where it just, should need more? Like, where would you start with that?
I don't know. I do think that with assistants, whether it's a voice assistant or it's embodied in some way like a robot, we're going to start choosing based on personality to some degree, right? Kind of like pets, right? You can be like a Boston Terrier person or a Golden Retriever person or whatever. So I think there's going to be an element of that in how we choose. But I also think that right now, none of those voice assistants really have that emotion sensing. So imagine if, say, the Google Assistant had a way to sense emotion in voice and respond appropriately. Like if you're getting angry, this happens all the time in my house with Alexa because I have kids and they love to mess with the tube, in various ways. And then she could just kind of be like, yeah, I get it. You're joking around with me. Or if I'm getting mad, like I accidentally, like I'm reading a book at night and it's all quiet and there happens to be the name Alexa or something that sounds like it and she comes on and I'm like, no, not you. She might get it, right? So I do think there's a lot of room for that without being too intrusive.
If a startup company engaged you, and it was a small company, say 50 people of designers and technologists, how would you move that culture to learn more about emotions and embed it within their products?
That's a really good question because we do that a lot of the time. So a lot of my clients now are not industries that you think about as understanding emotion, like financial services would be a good example, right? Where it's about products or efficiency or making money. But it's also about your whole life and your relationships with other people and your home. And so one thing that we do often in that case is just kind of step back. I think in design and in startups especially, we're moving so fast and we're trying to like plug up all the leaks, you know, and fix everything and move really quickly to solve this problem, to solve that problem, that we rarely give ourselves a chance to step back and say like, okay, what's the human perspective? What's the community perspective? What's the societal perspective on this? Or in terms of time, what does this look like a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out? In the future foresight community, they have tools for that they use, and I think we'll start seeing those brought over and kind of merged with our design thinking tools, and that will help us kind of figure out that stuff. And then just from a pure research perspective, I think we can start even without lots of fancy equipment, because a lot of the stuff is still pretty expensive, simply asking people about this stuff in the moment, after the fact, before their expectations, and trying it in different ways. Because I find that when you leave it completely open, people will come up with different emotions than if you give them a list. If you give people exercises in emotional granularity beforehand, you'll see a broader range. So there's all kinds of nuance to that. But in a way, it's also super simple too, that we need to start. That's a thing that we can actually start having conversations with our customers about.
Is there a product that you think is designing with emotion properly, like a good example?
They're getting there. I think auto industry is really, really doing some experimentation here. So the Japanese are always like way ahead of us on emotion. So part of it is because they have a strong need with such a big aging population. So like the social robots like Paro the seal and Pepper have been kind of very engaged in this emotion sensing, but also in cars. So a lot of the concept cars that are only like a year or two out that are coming out of Honda and Toyota have emotional sensors embedded. And it's not, I mean, part of it's for fun, but it's also, a lot of it is safety, like as the driver feeling stressed out. If you have a semi-autonomous car, you can have a handoff then perhaps, or make some kind of, you know, adjustments in the HMI to accommodate for that. So I think that's one realm. I think also in the area of mental health, we're seeing lots of really great applications of that. A lot of this technology came out of you know, working with children on the autism spectrum, and people experience PTSD, and so there's a lot of interesting applications of that.
I was curious if you've come across any examples of technology mediating or facilitating emotionally charged situations, either in between couples or between countries, or is there anything? Most of the examples seem to be kind of one-on-one so far.
Yeah, like the customer service example with voice, I think is a good example. I think people are starting to think about that, because we know that one core aspect of emotion is it's social and it's contagious. Like our emotions affect other people's emotions. So we've seen that played out on social media. I'm not aware of a product behind, you know, beyond just like the conceptual model of like People Keeper, which is a little bit tongue in cheek, right? That do that, or on a grander scale, like mediating in, say, policy discussions. But I know people are thinking about it already, so it would be a great use of it.
By the way, this is a great topic. I think it's good to keep in mind like human emotions when it comes to designing for technology. On the other hand, have you seen any examples of when people place too much emotional reliance on technology? For example, you know, I'm sure we've heard of like there are stories of people who get overly addicted to video games, or there's even a person in Japan who decided he wanted to marry his video game VR character, because his online girlfriend or virtual girlfriend doesn't place any expectations on him, and she's always happy to see him, stuff like that. What have you seen any applications on the other way around, where perhaps maybe there are people who are over reliant on getting emotional fulfillment?
I think that's all. It's, as you say, it's already happening. People are very willing to kind of suspend their expectations sometimes. There's a really great story about Robert Epstein, who was actually an AI researcher, and he fell in love with a chatbot. It was online dating, and he couldn't tell the difference until finally at one point he could. But so it does happen, and I think there's a big ethical discussion around sex robots right now, and should they be banned? They probably won't. What is the appropriate use? Are there uses in, like, say, criminal rehabilitation or not? Does it encourage? We don't know. There's lots of academic research going on in that area right now. One thing I think we can be almost certain of is that we design technology and technology designs us. And so the reason why I want to be cautious about emotion and not being too reductive is that the more we reduce it, the more we'll use that reduction in emotion ourselves. The more that we know a screen is detecting, smile like that, we may be apt to act that way. So we're going to. It's going to shape our behavior. And so I think this is why it's important for all of us to start thinking about this now, even though emotion is complicated in a lot of ways. We need to kind of, step up to it. So.
Thank you so much, Pamela.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
That was fantastic. And thank you all for coming. We have recently released last month's video on YouTube. If you go to Google Design, we have a Design is collection. So Design is Immersive went live yesterday, and in 2 weeks, we'll have this one available if you want to share it with anybody. And please join us next month for Design is Vision. Will be really exciting. We have a number of folks coming to talk about visioning methods and techniques and how you can envision the future. So thank you all.